call the meeting to order here. The Wednesday, August 19th special budget meeting for the Marquette City Commission is now called to order at 5:18 p.m. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Bonzal,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Frazier, Commissioner Schlegel,
Here.
Commissioner Stonehouse,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hill,
Here.
and Mayor Smith.
Here. I'm not sure if we need to make a motion to excuse Commissioner Frazier. I think he's on his way. We'll give him a little while, and if for some reason he
He's
doesn't.
coming in right now.
He's coming in right now? Okay. Go ahead and record him as present. He's here. Go ahead and say here, Commissioner Frazier. Perfect. Good timing. All right, commissioners, we have an agenda in front of us. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Stonehouse?
Your Honor, motion to approve the agenda is written.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bonzel?
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, please say no. Motion passes 7-0. I have no announcements this evening. Brings us to public comment. Public comments may not exceed 3 minutes per person. Please clearly state your name and physical address when making public comments. Do we have anyone on the phone or who has provided written comment this evening?
We have neither.
Neither? Okay. Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Brings us to the consent agenda. Commissioners, do we have a motion for the consent agenda? Commissioner Frazier?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Davis?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
All opposed?
Yes.
Please say no. Motion passes 7-0. Brings us to new business. We have two sections of the budget to discuss tonight. One is community development, which includes engineering, planning and zoning, and road safety. And then we've got the public works and utilities. I will turn it over to our CFO, Gary, and Mike, our city manager. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Commissioners. As you stated, tonight is really the nuts and bolts part of the city, the community development and public works utilities. Before we get started, as a follow-up from the John Swinson show last week, he did provide a memo following up on some questions that were asked. If you have any questions later, please feel free to reach out to me or to John, and we'll be glad to get back with you. And for those that are presenting tonight, for every minute you go after 7 o'clock, we've arranged for you to receive an electric shock. So you have that incentive. So if Dennis could start on page 182, that would be good. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Commission. This is Dennis. I'm here with Mick Tupla and Dave Stensis, the leadership cohort for the Community Development Department. I'm making an assumption that it was good for me to go because we actually couldn't hear Gary here on our end, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We come to you this evening, and I've already got the marching orders not to talk about how great my people do and move through this really fast, so I'm going to honor that. I do only have one thing to say is during the whole COVID crisis, community development was positive on the revenue side. So I'd like to give everybody an attaboy for that. We had less than 15% lost time in the entire department during that, during the whole shutdown before we got back on June 1st. The Community Development Department is comprised of the engineering division for the city of Marquette, also the planning, zoning, code enforcement divisions of the city of Marquette. We're going to start out on page 182. This is the fact sheet for the engineering department. I don't know that I need to really bore anyone with this front page. It really talks about the functions that we do. Basically, our department from the ground up We facilitate ideas through our planning department. We achieve community consensus and design those ideas through the engineering department and construct them and turn them off to Public Works. And then also through zoning, we do a little bit of the enforcement of that. We have 8.5 positions in the engineering division, I being the half-time, splitting my time in there. We are down one person at this time, that's a staff engineer, and those were due to well-deserved promotions of Nick Kilpala to city engineer and also Kellen Wessels to assistant city engineer. Under our program statistics, these are basically numbers that show in linear feet the amount of utility work, street, sidewalk, curbing, pathways, and the number of permits that we've issued. Some of those numbers are a little wonky. That was because we had, if you recall, back in spring of 19, there was a union lockout kind of at the state level that threw things off for us numbers-wise, but we seem to be progressing in accordance with our capital improvements plans. I'd like to move on to page 184, which is the proposed fee schedule for our department. All of the fees that we have for engineering are pretty much staying the same, even with the minimal cost of living increase. Gary's rounding on these keeps it within $5, so a lot of them stay the same. On page 185, we do have a couple of increases. Those are directly related to the cost. That is dealing with digital data and also some of our permits and the personnel work associated with that. We are removing a connection fee for water and sewer. These fees were designed for the private backyard systems. We found actually that these fees have been a deterrent to people doing the right thing and connecting to the system, and we feel that removing these fees will have people come more in line and get on the municipal system and end the backyard stuff that's creating a lot of problems and lawsuits throughout the community. We'll go ahead and move on to page 186, which is the revenues and expenditures for the engineering division. Here you have a layout of our total revenues being a little bit over $900,000. Then our total expenditures are about $1.2 million. As you know, that includes salaries all the way through our fixed costs, such as vehicle rental, building rental, and things along those lines. There are really no major things that I have to point out in here or major increased costs that aren't a fixed cost that was increased. And with that, I'll pause a little bit before I move on to planning and zoning. Are there any questions of the City Commission related to the engineering division that you've been presented?
Mayor Pro Tem Hill?
With the ending of the Lakeshore Boulevard reconstruction project, does that impact your budget in any way?
The Lakeshore project in itself affects the capital outlay budget for the city as a whole, but it does not have a direct reflection on this actual budget here dealing with the general fund. About the only way it would is if something blew up really bad and we had to send people out there on overtime for weeks at a time, but we don't see that happening being a contracted project with only one inspector on it.
So there's not city staff that are dedicating a lot of time to that, and instead it's being handled entirely by contractors, and then when the project's done, it won't have any added cost to the city?
Not through the engineering department.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, other questions for this section? All right, move ahead, Dennis. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to page 187. This is the planning division of community development. This is basically Dave We have Dave and myself a little bit, and then a portion of the administrative assistant. I mean, you can call it 1.75, but really, the reality is this is kind of the core of the planning and planning commission part of our function. This is where we facilitate ideas through the community and serve as liaisons. Under the program statistics, we have the planning commission meetings, some of the various functions of the city planner, which includes the license and easement applications and a lot of the liaison activity. I'd like to move on to page 188. This is the zoning function. This is probably, it's a very important but often misunderstood. This is where, you know, the planning activity is basically turned into ordinances enforced. And this deals with we have a planning technician, a zoning official, and then the administrative assistant helps with this. We are actually, I found out yesterday, our planning zoning technician is moving departments, so that's going to leave a vacancy for us. That is actually the person that does most of the code enforcement activity. Although that has been suspended due to COVID, we see a hole in there unless we can get somebody internally to post for that for some time. But of course, there's more to follow on that. Our program statistics here are basically a number of permits that we deal with in our department. And you can see that, you know, COVID really hasn't stopped that activity so much. I mean, you could say we're down a little bit, but we're definitely increased from 2018 in a lot of the categories from that point forward. Moving on to the fee schedule for the planning department, and these next couple of pages are actually planning and zoning departments combined. There are, you know, as you go through this, the ones highlighted in bold are the ones that saw a little bit of an increase by the 2%. And again, that has a lot to do with the math of rounding up and down. On page 190, we have the same situation here, and also on the bottom part, a lot of the more basic permits are being handled a little bit different internally, so there's just a minimal cost with those, and some of those just met the cusp to be rounded up as well from what they were last year. And then on page 191, we basically have the same situation, and I will note we are removing a fee from here, and that was, if you'll recall, the City Commission, after discussion with the Planning Commission, had taken out the section on the land development code that required tree replacement. And so we no longer have if it's no longer part of the ordinance, we no longer have a fee for that. Moving on to page 192 is the revenues and expenditures for planning and zoning department. A lot of the revenue in this department is directly related to the fees for permits. Any civil infractions we have or things along those lines, we roughly bring in about $60,000 to $70,000 on that on any given year. As far as the expenditures, we have very, very minimal changes, and in some cases we have decreases from the previous year on this, recognizing the budget challenges that we're going to be moving into. And we have a little bit of flexibility in this department, being that we have a professional planner with us and city engineers and stuff. A lot of the things we can do in-house without consulting assistance. So we don't see a lot of professional contractual money going out there unless we have a major project such as the land development code, which we've already got done. So we're kind of in our, you know, post-planning phase where we're doing a lot of implementation. So with that, I will entertain any questions about the planning and zoning operation.
Commissioners? Questions on planning and zoning? Just give it an extra minute. I see a couple people kind of looking at the details, but I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, go ahead, Dennis.
Thank you. Last one is page 193. This is our road safety fund. And this one is actually that I do in conjunction with CFO Gary Simpson. This is basically the money that comes from Lundin, and that money is used to pay off the bonds that we had done for the Wright Street improvements. And Gary, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or not.
Yes, thank you, Dennis. Can you hear me now? I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but with the agreement, and you'll see this in another section, we actually get two pieces of the pie from Lundin Mining. The first one is road safety, which is the one Dennis is responsible for. And then we get some money for road maintenance, which I believe Scott is in charge of that pot of money. So for road safety, we get $200,000 each year. For road maintenance, we get $500,000 each year. This agreement started in September of 2014, and it was intended to be an 8-year term. So really in 2022, it's set to expire, but also in 2022, if the agreement holds true to the end, we will receive a lump sum payment of $2.7 million. And that money is really for the intent of reconstructing Sugarloaf and Wright Street. Now, Lundin, they have reached out in the past few months looking at extending the agreement, and we were having some conversations along that line. And we're due to have another meeting to wrap that up, but due to COVID situations, it's a little bit hard for both parties to get together, but we're still working on that part. But as of now, this agreement's set to expire in 2022, and at which time we'll receive a lump sum payment of $2.7 million. So that's it.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I'm hearing you right there, Gary, and I wrapped my head around that properly. But with the extension of the mining going on up there, was there an extension of the funding that was originally put aside, or is that am I hearing that that's what you're kind of talking about right now?
Yes, that's what we're discussing now. We have presented them numbers of what we anticipate it would be, and then we just really need to probably have one more meeting. But like I said, it's proven difficult for both parties to get together. So we're discussing that, and one other thing that was on the table was maybe paying the $2.7 million earlier. I don't know if they're still interested in that. At the time we started those conversations, their commodity prices were pretty high. I don't know how they're holding up at this point, but so there's still some details to work out on that.
Okay, thank you.
Other commissioners? Okay. I think we are set on that section.
Yeah, that's a wrap on our end from community development. We thank you for your time.
Thank you to Dennis and your staff. I know that you work really hard, and there's a lot that you do that really helps the city move forward. So we certainly appreciate your work, and thank you for presenting tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, the next section, we're going to get into Public Works and Utilities, and we actually have 3 department heads that have a hand in a little bit of each of it. So I'm just going to ask each presenter to just start chiming in when we get to your area. Hopefully you have the calendar in front of you, because we will start on page 195 with City Hall. So Eric, I believe that's you, but as we get to the others, just chime in when we get to your area. And again, please be brief, or otherwise you'll get an electric shock. So thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Steeman, the Director of Facilities and Maintenance here at the city. We're going to quick go through some of the buildings. and motor pool this evening. So I'm going to start with City Hall on page 195 with the fact sheet. That's just a basic, list of what we do in the building. You'll notice there's no positions there, as we used to have a janitor that was full-time, and through attrition we were able to contract that out and save some dollars. Moving on to page 196, we're basically flat except for a couple of projects that we would like to get done. This year we have PD lower level flooring replacement. So the police department still has some of that original 70s flooring, and it's getting pretty rough. So we put $24,000 in there to take care of that. And then for those of you who have maybe seen some of our roof leaks along outside the gym, that ramp area, we do have some issues with water getting in there. So we're gonna replace that flat roof and get that sealed back up. Is there any questions that pertain to City Hall? Okay, moving on to page 197, Park Cemetery. There you can see the seasonal staff that we have. We employ 4 part-time seasonals that work for us to take care of the ground. We also have the statistics there for the various sales that we do and burials. You'll see last year we did do our first green burial. After it was approved last year, we had one pretty much right away. There has not been any sales since then, but it was nice to see somebody take advantage of that right off the bat. Moving on to the fee schedule. On 198, our fees here have remained flat for this year. We did not have any increases, and we are probably priced on the higher end of local cemeteries. So we did not, and we're covering our costs, so we did not see a need to change any of those fees. Moving on to the budget on page 200. We do have one project in here that was part of a CIP item for the retaining pond wall repair. So that would be the wall that houses the retaining pond in the middle of the cemetery, kind of near the Kaufman Mausoleum, if you're familiar with that. Since we do have a natural spring on the property, we're always, the level is always varying within that pond. And if we didn't relieve it of water, somehow we would definitely start flooding. So it's a crucial piece to keeping the cemetery in good shape. And then for the most part, all our other operational expenses are flat. There's actually a slight decrease, and that's because last year we put in money for the green burial stuff, and that since that is all completed now, that has come off for this year. Are there any questions on cemetery? All right, moving on to 441. This account is shared by myself and Scott Kimbenzi between roads and then parks. So I'm going to let Scott kind of kick it off and talk about his part, and then I'll interject as we go.
Good evening, Scott Kimbenzi, Director of Public Works. As you notice, there's a lot of positions listed on this page, page 201, but a lot of those positions are spread out across all the operations. We just have a few home accounts we use for these sheets. The only fee, if we move on to page 203, that we have adjusted is annually we end up adjusting the solid waste fee. A big portion of this adjustment is the $6 a ton tipping fee that was added in there by the landfill authority, and then we have some contractual increases with our solid waste hauler. Other than that, that's really the only increase. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the actual solid waste fund, which will be coming up shortly here. As far as the actual budget for public works goes, it's pretty much status quo if we look at page 205. The only real difference is the 775 line item, and that really just comes down to a couple more small repair projects And on page 206, all of those little projects are listed out under 101-441-775 at the bottom there. Are there any questions, or Eric, did you want to interject anything as far as 441 goes?
No, I'd just like to point out that, you know, some of these various projects, you know, they run the gamut of a lot of the parks. A lot of those are parks buildings that you see there, so they're just minor maintenance projects that need to be taken care of.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, is someone else? Commissioner Bonzo, you want to go?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I believe this is the appropriate place to ask about this. So I noticed that in 441, down in the notes on 441-775, we're going to be spending $10,000 on boardwalk decking. Is that the boardwalk down by the Hampton?
Yeah, yes, it is. That we've been replacing decking as we go. For whatever reason, that decking has failed prematurely, and we've been replacing boards as we go. We'd like to try to do a little bit larger project this year or this coming year to try to address more of that. I mean, if you've gone down there, you've seen a lot of the cones, and I don't know if it was bad lumber or what the case was, but we definitely that lumber should have lasted at least another 10 years.
No, absolutely. I've definitely noticed that issue, and I'm glad that we're doing something about it. I guess my only concern was that I think, you know, my understanding was that boardwalk is or was the sort of the public benefit. You know, when I served in the Brownfield Authority, we always required some kind of public benefit to come out of any brownfield project. And my understanding was that boardwalk was the public benefit that was to be developed and maintained by the developers of the hotel. So did they just assume the cost of building that, or do they have any responsibility to help maintain it moving forward, or am I just incorrect about that?
I can't speak to what was set up in that original brownfield. I mean, we've always maintained items down there, like we have a sprinkler system, and that's something we've always maintained. If there is something beyond that, it's I don't have any knowledge of it, but maybe Gary or Mike might be able to chime in on if they know.
Yeah, I can answer that. The brownfield is only responsible for the installation. We are responsible for the maintenance, which is typical of all of our brownfield projects that have public assets.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
I know Mayor Pro Tem, you had a question, and then Commissioner Schlegel sent me a message. He has a question as well. Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Where does, is there like a contingency for weather and storm damage? And how do we, I'm thinking too, I don't know where, if you could, a heads up on where things like damage to Lakeshore Boulevard behind Lakeview Arena, that area between Fair and Pine, where does, so contingency on weather-related costs, and then where can I expect to see some budgeting for the cost of maintaining the land and road behind Fair to Pine?
Scott,
Scott, can you chime in on that? I mean, since it'd be road related.
For all the road related things, the minor repairs and that's coming up in the major and local streets. And any of the shoreline erosion type issues we've been dealing with have been in the stormwater account, which is 555, which will be coming up shortly as well.
Okay. So roads are in stormwater, and what was the other one? Sorry, I'm trying to get this.
I think we're going to address those all tonight.
They're coming up. Okay.
Yeah, they're coming up.
Okay,
Commissioner
thanks.
Schlegel?
Thank you, Mayor. My only question when I'm looking through the, I'll get back to it here, authorized positions. I'm not seeing the position that we approved for the fire truck maintenance. Is that a specific new position, or is that encapsulated in another position that was?
That'd be in
assigned
the,
to,
Commissioner, that'd be in the
Maintenance
motor pool
positions
budget.
For that type of stuff will all come in the motor pool, and that'll be coming up shortly as well.
Okay, thank you.
Seems like we want to kind of skip ahead to those sections because we got more questions, so let's keep moving along, and we can always come back if we need to, but a lot of these are so intertwined.
So if we
Okay.
go to page 207 and
Continue on
whoever
on
wants to start.
page 207 then, which is the major street. And you'll notice it's broken down into a few different categories. You've got the actual street maintenance, we've got winter maintenance, we've got bike path maintenance in there, and we've also got a couple of other ones in there. One is we maintain South McClellan, essentially from the bypass down to Division. And then there's another one in there, the routine preservation. That is, we actually maintain the township portion of Wright Street. So we go all the way out to Target, essentially there, and then we are reimbursed by the county for that. So that's what the overall budget encompasses. As you know, it's mainly funded by Act 51, and there's a few other formulas that Gary doesn't allow us to play with. He takes care of those himself from the revenue side. Not a lot has changed for the statistics. The budget itself is fairly flat as far as all the expenditures go. I will just note all the way to the bottom on page 210, we do have a few notes on the traffic markings and traffic signal maintenance and street tree replacement. Those have all been pretty standard for the last couple of years. We do have money. I'll try to hit this one up early because I figured this would be a question with regards to on-street traffic markings for parking and also the parking lots in the downtown and the business district. We do have funds to take care of our portion of that. Most of that falls under the DDA by contract. We have 100% of the parking lots are done, paid for by the DDA, and it's a 50-50 split for all the on-street stuff. We are just kind of waiting to see when Becky can fit that into her budget. I know this year was kind of a tough year when they waived all the parking, so, or the fees for the parking. So I know they're waiting till they get enough revenue back in there to be able to do that. I don't know if there's any particular questions for the major streets.
That did answer my question. Thank you. I had a question from a resident recently about that specifically.
If I
Commissioner-
could,
oh, go ahead.
excuse me, if I could just get everybody to go to page 208. I can take care of the revenue on this one and also the next fund. But as Scott indicated, this is, our two street programs are largely funded by Act 51 money, and that is really sales tax from gasoline. So actually, the more people get out and drive and the more visitors that we come into the state. And again, this is one of those issues that just because you buy gas in Marquette doesn't mean we get that money. It all goes down to Lansing, and then Lansing has their formulas that they divide everything out by. So using the latest formula that they have given, those are the numbers that I've inserted. And really, that's for the 574 line item. The first two, the 547 snow allocation, you'll see that in both funds. We really don't know what that number is going to be until we receive the money, and it's really based on a rolling average of snowfall each winter and how much we spend on winter maintenance. And it's a tough one to figure out because sometimes we receive half of what we anticipated, and then there are times when we receive quite a bit more. So we think the number we've inserted is conservative, and that's in both funds. And also, you'll notice too, in both funds, that transfer in line item, that's money from the general fund, and that money is to balance out the operations of the major and local streets. Because typically we keep these at a 0 level fund balance. Now from year to year, there might be a small amount of fund balance, but typically we try to keep that at 0. And the transfer in amounts are what we anticipate will be to keep it at 0. And no other comments on revenue unless you have any questions.
Commissioner Schlegel had a question.
Yeah, thank you. In regards to the reconstruction of Wright Street from the last portion that was just redone, restriped and repaved up to Target, that we're responsible for that, and that's part of the lending monies that we get. Is the striping, is that our issue as well, or is that the county that takes care of that portion?
The striping within the township would be done under a county-held contract.
So everything above, up on the top of the hill up to Target, that's under the county?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Member Pro Tem Hill?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a lot to keep track of. Thank you, everyone, for, looks like there's a lot of work that goes into keeping this all up. Is the non-motorized maintenance I see is separate? Is that because it's coming in separate through through the state Act 71, or do we make that decision?
That is what's required by the state chart of accounts that they give us to use.
Yeah, and because there's federal dollars that come in that way too. And I think it is important to keep the bike path in really good shape. And then I noticed, but in 2017 and 2018, there's no transfers in from the general fund, but there was a $356,000 transfer in 2019.
Correct, and it's all just a timing thing. Like some years, the bonds that we issue are enough to cover everything, and sometimes it's not. And it really just depends if all the construction is finished that year or if it has to carry over to the next year. So it's really just timing issues mostly. But we do like to see that 0 there, because that means the money can stay in the general fund and we can use that for other things.
Okay,
Commissioner Bonzo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, to that point, I actually did have a question about the transfers in from the general fund. So, you know, as Mayor Pro Tem Hill noted, in fiscal 17, we didn't have any funds transferred over into the major street fund. And I guess this really applies to both the major and local street funds, but you know, very little, like 70,000 in the local street fund in fiscal 17. So you fast forward, fiscal 20, we had much larger transfers, like almost $250,000 into major street, 1.24 million into local streets. In fiscal 21, we're actually going to be increasing those transfers slightly, or being asked to. So I'm a little concerned about road maintenance costs slowly sort of rising in the coming years and sapping funds from other areas in the budget. Do we expect the amount of general fund transfers required for the major and local street funds to continue to increase over the next few years? And if so, is there any kind of plan to try and mitigate that and make these funds more fiscally self-sustaining in the long run?
Well, really there's no way we can operate the funds just on that 51 money that we get. And the only way to lessen the transfer in from the general fund is if the state starts appropriating more money, or if the gas tax percentage were to raise itself and the state, shares that with all the municipalities. Otherwise, that number is going to be very fluid from year to year. It's just going to really depend on the amount of, construction, and also the winters that we have. If we have a mild winter, that will certainly help keep the transfer in number low. But if we were to have a pretty bad winter and more effort is spent towards that, then, that transfer in will need to increase to pay for that. Now, eventually we get reimbursed for some of those winter maintenance costs through the snow allocation line, but it's never a dollar for dollar thing. So really, these two funds and the amount we have to transfer in from the general fund, really it's out of our hands. It just depends on the amount of money we get through the Act 51.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. It is just a concern that I had when looking at the budget. It seems that both with regards to our water infrastructure and our roads, that just maintaining what we currently have is becoming a increasingly serious challenge. So I think it's something to be mindful of.
Other commissioners? All right, I think we can move on to the next section.
On page 211, we start with the local streets, and you really just go from your larger, higher volume streets down to your more neighborhood streets with this one, if you will. And it's a lot of the same type of maintenance and both summer type maintenance and winter type maintenance. One difference this year that I will point out is the local sidewalk maintenance was moved inside this fund this year. It used to be a standalone fund, and really I think it's simply for ease of accounting for Gary, if you want to chime in, Gary, but I believe that's the biggest reason it was moved in.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was addressing a question from Mike. To point out in the local sidewalk maintenance, where it says miles plowed sidewalk in the statistical section, I think that should be, for FY20, that should be 23.5 instead of 2.35. So just wanted to point
correct.
that.
They're all 23.5.
Yeah. So, but to address what Scott said, so each year I'm required to do an Act 51 report to the state, which shows, how we're spending the money that we receive. And as part of that, I'm required to show over a 10-year period that, we're taking care of non-motorized items, which consist of sidewalks and bike paths and that type of thing. We used to keep the sidewalk program in the general fund, and because of that, I wasn't able to show that in the Act 51 report. And I just happened to be at a conference, and I asked the people there who were experts on this report, how can I get that from the general fund onto that report, because I couldn't do it the way we were doing it. And it was at their suggestion to move the sidewalk program into the local street fund. Bottom line wise, for the city budget, there's no difference. It's just that it's going to make, when you compare it to previous years, the local street fund will be a little bit higher than what you normally see, but in the end, it's all zero balance, and it's really just something I did to help us out when I have to do the Act 51 report at the end of the year.
I think we're still on page 211, correct? We haven't quite finished this section yet.
Correct. So, Scott, if we could continue on into the budget part. On the revenue side, it's the exact same thing I just said for major streets. So somebody wants to loop that recording, we'd be good on there. So if we could get into the expense side, thank you.
On the expenditure side, everything again is pretty flat with the local streets as well. So I guess I'll just ask if there's any questions on that.
Commissioner Bonzo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just curious, I know that Mayor Smith had actually asked about this in the past, but in this budget or in the future, do we have any plans to install more of the sort of semi-permanent crosswalk, like pedestrian crossing signs? Like we have a couple of them downtown on Front Street and Lakeshore. I think we have some pretty dangerous intersections and crosswalks in Marquette. I'm just curious about that.
All those signs right now, we do the installations and we take them back up for the winter, but they've all been funded either through the DDA or through private donations at this point.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
In winter maintenance, 479, it was, costs have gone up quite a bit compared to 2017. Like vehicle rentals equipment rentals doubled. The repair and maintenance supplies has gone up more than doubled. Has something changed there?
Usually what Scott does, he when we do the budget requests, we just budget for an average winter. So my guess would be in 2017, it was a milder winter than normal, which is going to skew the numbers. And again, this number feeds into another calculation the state does to give us our snow allocation. So because that number was lower, in future years, we're going to see a little bit less reimbursement, but it's actually good to see that number low because it means we didn't have as harsh of a winter as we normally would.
2017 was a mild winter, I can tell you that from memory.
But the numbers that Scott presented for FY21, it's really just anticipating an average winter. And so it could be the opposite effect. If we get, hit pretty hard with snow, then, those numbers will increase as well. So.
And in terms of the purchase power and purchase stormwater, those are getting reimbursed out of, stormwater I would assume is getting, that's sort of a reimbursement out of that separate fund. I understand what purchase power is, but the purchase stormwater.
Yeah, the stormwater is, the cities, we have the stormwater fund, and this is just the local streets portion to pay for stormwater, and I'm not sure exactly what that is. I don't know if Scott knows the exact areas, but maybe it's probably just street right away, I'm thinking, Scott, or do you know more?
The purchase stormwater? Yeah, essentially, that was put together by Jim Compton in engineering a while back, and it takes into account the area of the local streets for the right of way.
Why did it go up from 154 to 215?
Because we've been increasing rates, so that's why.
Okay.
Those staying city commissioners.
All right, yeah, thank you.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, on page 215, we have the sanitation fund, and this one I will have a few more comments on, I guess. Right now, we're halfway through our 7-year contract with our current hauler. We have essentially gone to a system that's about 1/3 carts and 2/3 of the people are still green bag users. But every year we keep going up on the carts. So eventually I'm hoping we can feel comfortable with making a switch to a cart system. When we did the bids in 2017, a full cart system would have been by far and away the the cheapest way to go, or the, least expensive way to go, but there just wasn't a feeling that everybody was ready to make that move yet. So a couple of things that have been happening. Marquette County Solid Waste Management Authority is getting ready to move back to single stream recycling from the dual stream recycling. One of the things that we've all looked to the county to do is to really put out a consistent message on recycling. And one of the ways that is supported by Eagle and all the constituents is getting that one central message out. If you remember back in 2017 when we made the switch to the contract, we had all kinds of issues with, were we accepting pizza boxes? Was the next municipality accepting pizza boxes? And it was a very inconsistent message out there. So on September 14th, there's a mailing going out to everybody in the county that is going to explain the new recycling system at the county and the switch back to single stream. They are going to make that switch October 1st. It does not mean any change for curbside service to the City of Marquette residents at this point. We will be making the switch as soon as they are ready to single stream, and after that October 1st date, if somebody actually has switched, it won't be an issue anyway. It's a little easier going to single stream from dual stream than the switch we made a few years back, going from single stream to dual stream. The current collection, we've put a few public service announcements out on this, but they've made some changes to the collection. They now do separate recycling and garbage collection, which has thrown a lot of people off because they are running separate routes for them. So often there might be 4, 6, 8 hours between when your recycling and your garbage is picked up. We have had some discussions with them. They have struggled a little bit with the volume, with everybody staying home, or a good majority of the people staying home, working from home now. There's a lot more household waste out there than what there used to be. And it's taking a little bit longer to get through it. They are also, just so you're aware, going through a complete changeover of personnel at the Marquette office for the hauler there. The route manager left last Friday, and I think the manager left approximately a month or two before that. So there's a lot of changeover, and they've got a lot of new drivers coming in as well, but we have some meetings set up with their new staff that aren't quite at the Marquette office yet to kind of start addressing some of that stuff. They did make a change over to an automated cart system. So now the carts can be picked up automatically without the driver exiting the vehicle even. I'm sure glass will be a big question moving forward. We will be making plans with the hauler now that we're going to be back to single stream to have either a collection or a drop off for glass. At this point in time, the landfill will not accept it as part of their single stream recycling. It will have to be a source separated collection. So we'd either have to make a completely separate collection, which might be every 5th week or something of that nature, or we would have to use a drop off. One of the things that we had talked about moving to was, looking for some grant money to go after additional recycling carts now that we're moving to single stream. We're paying close attention to what's happening at the state level. The major issue is right now, everything that's been passed with how those grant programs are funded are tied to other revenues within the state, meaning if the state isn't able to fund certain things at a level that's guaranteed in there, then these grant dollars are not available for the solid waste for getting these carts and that. As I mentioned last year, there was a $6 per ton tipping fee increase, which was incorporated into the hauling contract at that time, almost a year ago now. And that essentially is paying for the new recycling material recovery facility at the county. We have scheduled contract increases that were fairly minimal. And then the other major increase is just the volume and the increased days we're open at the rubbish drop-off site. We are still hosting once a week during the summer months the household hazardous waste collection for the county. We recently hosted a successful tire collection at the Flink Farm site on August 13th, I think it was. And then we also participated with the Lower Harbor cleanup. I think you probably saw some of the stuff on the collection that was done down there, and that's really spearheaded by one of our community members, Don Fossbender, who's a scuba diver. He really coordinates and organizes 98% of that, but it's been a very good program for the last 2 years. Moving on to page 216, if we look at the budget, there are some increases in there. A lot of that, as I mentioned, has to do with the tipping fee and how some of the things are budgeted. But if you look at, you know, the transportation, printing and publishing, rental, a lot of that stuff is pretty stagnant to where it used to be. So are there any questions on the sanitation fund?
I'm not seeing any. Go ahead.
Okay, moving on to page 217, we have the road maintenance fund. And I think Gary kind of covered most of that with the Lundin money. I'll just point out some of the specific projects that were done at the bottom of page 217 with that money so far. And I will note on page 218, the Wright Street storm, which if you look at line item under Department 598 capital outlay, 283-598-972. That wasn't a budgeted item, but if you recall, just recently we had that emergency repair of one of the storm culvert crossings underneath Wright Street. And that's what that is for. I do have another one budgeted in the stormwater fund. And I didn't realize that we were going to direct charge right to this fund for the culvert, or I would have placed it in here. But I do have replacement scheduled for one more, which will use the cured in place pipe to restore that as well this upcoming year. Are there any questions on the road maintenance fund?
Not seeing any questions. You can go ahead.
Okay, Eric is going to do the fuel system fund, which is our internal fuel storage.
All right, on page 219, you can see the fact sheet for the fuel system fund. There's a list there of the people that we sell fuel to. There's actually been some interest from the BLP as well, looking to come over here to purchase fuel from us. So we did lose the school system when we transferred over to the new building, but since we don't use it to make money, we just add a fee onto the gallon just for future replacement costs and functionality of the system. So it really hasn't affected us. If you go on to the following page, 220, you can see the budget there for that, and it's pretty well flat. This varies every year, kind of along with the winter maintenance. Light winters, we use less fuel. Heavy winters, we use more. So it really just kind of varies. So, a lot of times we don't use everything that we budget for, depending on the year, but it's budgeted just in case we have that bad year, or potentially there's a sudden increase in fuel price. And for those that are interested, our surcharge on each gallon is 22 cents, and that's what goes for maintaining the fuel depot as well as future replacement of the tanks and such. Are there any questions on the fuel fund?
Commissioner Bonzo? Oh, my mic's not on.
Thank you. This should be a pretty quick one, but I'm just curious, fiscal 20, we budgeted $615,000 for fuel for vehicles. Ended up spending significantly less than that, but just curious, we're looking at a pretty significant decrease in the amount that we're budgeting for fuel. So I was just curious what the reasoning behind that was.
I would say probably the biggest reason is, gas is a lot cheaper now, and probably we didn't really start this fund until 2018, so we're just kind of working out the kinks and how it works. So it was probably a combination of cheaper gas, and it was just a budget miscalculation at the time we did the budget.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay, page 221, we look at the stormwater utility. We do have one authorized position on here, and that's a hydrology engineer. That's actually Jim Compton, who's part of the engineering department. And once we get there, he's got an administrative portion of the budget, which is lower down. And really that didn't change a whole lot for this upcoming year, so I didn't see a lot to point out. But if Mick wants to talk about that when we get there, he can. Looking at page 222, you start talking about where we had the storm line stabilization. That was placed in the construction account, the Department 459. And if you look on there, that's the $250,100. We had 3 projects that essentially came out of that. The first is about $220,000. That was all the work, essentially from the house at the end of Fair north to Pine Street. We had the project, which was about $13.5, I think, that was done just south of South Beach there, about 2/3 of the way down South Lake Street. And that's adjacent to the bike path. And then we had a commitment that we had made of $17,000 to go towards the grant funding to do the rest of the repairs between that location and basically the Welcome Center at just past the city limits there. Now, we did get some very good news recently that they were successful in getting the money that they needed to do all 5 locations along there. Originally, they were only granted enough money to do 3 of the locations. but we just recently, in the last week, received word that they're going to be able to get all 5 locations done. So that's great news for everything along the bike path there, and making sure that we don't erode anymore so that we start losing more of the bike path. Going down, how did we pay for that last year? Well, a lot of that funding along the shoreline was paid for by taking the project that we were going to contract out, which was a stormwater retention project between 5th Street and 7th Street along the bike path. And we really didn't spend a lot of the money. We're going to spend about $15,000 on getting some of the concrete removed on the old loading dock for the train depot that's down there. But other than that, we've been able to do everything in-house, and that was a substantial savings that we were able to apply to the shoreline stabilization. Other than that, not a lot of change to any of our maintenance numbers. Question I think earlier was asked about, what do we have in there for contingency? Annually, the Public Works Department has $75,000 in there for unforeseen stormwater events like that, or maintenance. And the engineering department also has $75,000 in there for unforeseen construction needs. So I know that's not a lot considering how much was just spent on the shoreline, but that really is our contingency for that right now. And if we look at page 224, you can see some of that in the notes. And as I mentioned, the Wright Street project is a slip lining of one of the cross culverts under Wright Street. So we may, it's kind of a Gary question, I guess, that may get paid for out of the other fund, I guess, for the road. Are there any questions related to stormwater?
Can I just ask, are you referring to that Eagle Mine might be able to pay for that with that fund? On Wright
Yes.
Street?
On the right street.
Can we have Gary
Yes.
talk about that, or are we still kind of debating internally?
No, I think what Scott is saying, he put it in the stormwater fund, and probably should have put it in, the road maintenance fund, but that's something we can do internally, so we'll take care of that.
Thank you for clarifying. Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, so in the notes there at the end, and yeah, that was really helpful, thank you. Those questions were top of mind for me for this department. And at the end there, there's, I think that's 555-463-801. Those projects there, are those capital projects? That's a lot of money right there when you add that all up. Wilson Street, Superior Watershed Partnership, unanticipated drainage, structure lining, and Wright Street.
Correct. The way we'll handle it accounting-wise, we have a $25,000 threshold for an item to be capital outlay. So of those items that are more than $25,000 at the end, we will more than likely be capitalizing them. And the rule being, it has to be $25,000 or more, and it has to be more than just normal maintenance. It has to significantly extend the life and all of that kind of good bean counter stuff that everybody enjoys talking about.
So what's Wilson Street and Superior Watershed Partnership? I think we covered everything else.
Watershed Partnership, we used to give them an outright cash, not really a donation, but they do a lot of work for us on grant programs. And probably, I don't know, more than 5 years ago, it was kind of like, instead of just giving them $25,000, they basically had to earn it. So each time we're successful in getting a grant, we do compensate them for the administrative time that they took to do that grant. And we just anticipate it's going to be $30,000 because they're really very good at doing grants.
Other questions?
The Wilson Street project is for similar reasons to what we're doing the project between 5th and 7th this year. We're trying to redirect some of the stormwater to make sure we're getting it into the pipes and keep it off other people's property.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
page 225 is a wastewater treatment plant, and we'll switch over to Mark O'Neill for that.
Okay, jumping in on 225, the wastewater plant, as you know, the city owns 84% of the wastewater treatment plant. The Marquette Township owns 9 and Shockley owns 7. With the retirement of our former director, Kurt Goodman, and the promotions, we have one open operator position. We're going to keep open for some time. Any questions on the fact sheet?
That was so fast, I didn't have a chance to even catch my breath. Nice job. Woo!
I was told to speed it up.
No questions.
Plus, I'm a little nervous.
You're doing great.
Okay, moving to 226. Fee schedule, like Scott touched on with the tipping fee going up at the landfill. We have our Vactor waste, we call it. It's a lot of material from like the city's Vactor or other contractors, primarily sand that gets in the stormwater sewer collection system. You water it here and then have to haul it to the landfill. So that increase in that fee will help cover the cost. Moving on to 227. As far as revenues go, the only thing I really wanted to point out were other, line item other. Primarily, you can see we budgeted $35,000 there. 2019, we had $156,000 in income, and we've already hit $160,000 this year. Primarily, that's industrial wastewater that is either trucked here or we permit somebody like We Energies to discharge to the sanitary system. But that's the type of revenue that can go away overnight, so we try to be conservative there. Any questions on revenue?
Nope.
Okay, moving into operations. Getting down into operating supplies, I increased that a little bit. We go through a lot of distilled water in our laboratory, and our still is on its last legs. So that increases to cover the cost of a new still. And then you can see a new line item there. It's cogen maintenance, and that is primarily because of our advisory board kind of wanted to break the cost down and to track that. So we broke it out of professional contractual, and we have a separate line item for that. That is part of the JCI project, our cogen units. Flipping the page, and you can see the benefits of those two engines. 2018, 2017 were the 2 full years where we did not have the engines online, and we spent $254,000 in electricity. The next year was $230,000, and we're looking at next year's budget is $72,000.
Wow. Wow.
One of the offshoots of that, we don't produce enough biogas to run both of those engines, and we knew that going into it, but the benefit was still there. You can see the increase in our natural gas cost. Next month, I'm hoping to bring you the solids handling project, looking to start our engineering on it. And one component of that would be to create more biogas and bring that number down. Otherwise, it's a pretty flat rate or budget as far as operations go. Under admin, do I have any questions on that? I think it's all pretty straightforward.
No questions?
Okay, and then moving into the capital outlay, The water plant, wastewater plant, the water distribution system, and our lift stations, we use computer equipment and software to run the whole process, monitor the whole process, and then we also have our own network, separate from the city network. So we're looking to upgrade all of that equipment, including the network switches. And that total number of $79,000 would be the wastewater treatment plant's share of that cost. We move on, or?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, under the fact sheet for the water filtration plant, not really a lot to point out there. It's a 24/7 operation, and we pretty much cover that with 4 operators and a supervisor. The gallons of water treated, you can see that varies quite a bit. You know, if we have a year where we have a lot of freeze ups and have some wet runs, we're obviously going to produce more water. No questions there. I'll turn it over to Scott for the distribution system. Fact sheet.
On the transmission and distribution there on page 231, all those positions still exist. It looks like we forgot to copy the one column over to the other. Other than that, there's really nothing to point out. We will still be doing the large meter testing again this year. And the reason a lot of those numbers blank on page 232 there is during the JCI contract, we didn't have to.
Just a minute. Hey, Mark, I don't think you're on mute, Mark. If you want to go ahead and mute yourself, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
So that's all right. We didn't have to do any of the testing while the JCI project was going on, and then we waited a year after that. So that's why those statistics are just kind of starting up again. Page 233. Mark, did you want to touch on fees at all, or?
There's really no changes at all there, so. We can move on to the water fund, page 234.
Yep.
Any questions on the revenue end? As you know, all 3 utilities are recommending a 0% increase. Moving on then to the water treatment plant. Don't really have a lot to point out other than you can see purchase power is down. That is a result of, we had replaced as part of the JCI project, the 7 bigger pumps down at the water filtration plant. There's no questions on that. I'll pass it off to Scott for distribution.
Okay, moving
I've
on
got
to the
just a quick one if I can, Paul, here.
Yep, go ahead, Paul.
In the future, it would be really nice, and we've kind of touched on this with other areas of the budget so far, and I'm sure it'll continue to, but since a lot of money was really sunk into the cogens and the JCI project for the waste treatment plant, it would really be nice, and we're hoping that this is the next year that we can really get some tangible numbers from money savings. If we can, kind of celebrate that project and be notified at some point in the near future on such savings, because those areas that money went were pretty expensive, and really kind of counting on it for showing the turnaround.
Yeah, I don't know if Eric has a comment on that when we're supposed to get the hard numbers for that. I don't really have that knowledge on the top of my head.
Yeah, I can answer.
No rush on it at all. I'm just saying, in the next, several months.
I can answer that. This is Eric. The JCI monitors that throughout the year, and they do a annual report. If anything was out of whack, they would notify us if they see any discrepancies. But they look at our utility bills and they monitor things, and we should be receiving our year-end report here in October. to give us
Great.
an idea. We did get a construction report of the savings, and, you know, they came in a little bit better than they thought. So, you know, the cogens have been working even better than anticipated. So, you know, we expect to be a little bit further ahead than what was originally planned.
That's great news. I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
On the 538 distribution, I'll just point out a couple of things. The 801 is budgeted the same, but you'll see the projected year end is up, and that was, there's a JCI 1 year charge that's in there. And then on the 930 repair and maintenance, every year we go through with Eagle and look at some of the things within the water system. And one of the things they touched upon with us over the past couple of years was better maintenance of some of the control valves and the a few of the other meter pits and some of that stuff. And that's the additional money that's in there is for that maintenance that we'll be contracting out to a third party as part of their recommendation. The 591, 561 account is mostly it's all administration. There's not a lot of really changes to note in there. It's all a lot to do with the meter reading and that type of stuff. The last portion of the account is the capital outlay, and you'll note on page 237, all those expenditures are pretty well broken down for those various different line items. You can see exactly what they are.
One thing I'd like to point out, one thing I'd like to point out for the administration, and you'll see it in the sewer part too, but part of the JCI program was to do the AMI meters. We used to have, well, at one time when I first started, we had a full-time meter reader. Then we went to 2 part-timers. And with the AMI, we don't have to have the part-time meter readers anymore because it's all being done, you know, electronically. So we do still charge the utility billing portion of that, which is really a portion of Christina's salary. She's the utility billing clerk. So I just wanted to point out that in addition to savings from JCI with the electricity bill, we also were able to reduce some labor cost in the water and sewer fund.
Can I ask, at the citywide water meter replacement, there's still 30,000? Is that, I'm gonna make a request that we have bigger print on these, but I'm really, especially with a mask on, I can't see. That what is that number? 598,984 or 538? The very last one.
Yes,
Are we
it's
still-
598.
Are we still paying to replace meters, I guess is my question.
Yeah, Scott, can you address
Essentially,
that?
we're hoping not to have to use that, but
Okay.
we do have to have some money in there for replacement of any of the things that would go bad, that would be part of the AMI or the meters.
Because, yeah, we were kind of, there was sort of catch up there for a little while of getting those things all finished up, but you're saying it's finished and this is just contingency. That sounds
Pretty
good.
much.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you.
Other questions on this section? Commissioner Stonehouse?
Just one question or comment, Gary. I seem to recall a few years ago being told that the person working for the city with the greatest propensity for accidents and sick time and being laid up, et cetera, was the meter readers.
It was could be an interesting job for those folks. You know, they were usually good, adept at outrunning dogs and that kind of a thing, but
So really, by moving them on, in other words, moving away from meter readers, we've really done very well. That's
Correct,
the end of my
yes.
comment. No
Yes.
explanation needed.
yes, no, that's a good comment, so thank you. So if we could move along to the sewer, page 238. whoever
38.
Takes it.
238 is oh, I'm sorry. The wastewater pump stations, our lift stations, did have one typo in there on the program statistics. It says the city of Marquette owns and operates 13 lift stations. That's incorrect. It's 12. Wastewater staff maintains all the lift stations. Other than that, I don't have any more comments on that.
All right, keep rolling, please. Thank you.
Page 239 is the sewer operations, and you can see the statistics there, but there's nothing that really jumps out at me. The only thing I'll point out is we have suspended a lot of the sewer maintenance during the COVID crisis. On page 240, we've got the revenues starting there. Gary, I don't know if you want to mention anything with the revenues like you did for the water, or?
Yeah, just as was pointed out, for all three utilities, stormwater, water, and sewer, we are recommending a 0% rate increase for this year. And that's really due to COVID-19 considerations. And it was back in May, I believe it was, we did have the utility rate study updated, and they did point out that by doing 0% for FY21, it won't devastate the systems at all.
On page 240, going into 241, the operations, which is the sewer collection system, essentially everything's pretty much flat across the board for that. There's no real change whatsoever. Mark, do you want to tackle lift stations?
Yeah, same there. There's not really much to say other than, we try to keep it as close as we could as we have in the past.
Gary, anything on admin?
No, just replay the comments I made underwater and we'll be good.
And then at the bottom of page 242, we've got the capital portion starting. And again, I'll just note that on page 243, I think a lot of that stuff is pretty much spelled out for all those line items if you want details.
Hey, Scott, this is Mike. Would you touch on the smoke testing capital outlay, please?
Sorry, Mike, I couldn't hear what you were.
Could you address, it's under the 598801 sanitary smoke testing for $35,000. Mike was just wanting you to make some comments
Yes.
on that.
So one of the programs that we looked at starting this year was sanitary smoke testing. It basically looks if you have areas where you might have cross connections between your storm sewer and your sanitary sewer, or if residents or businesses would have storm drains or roof drains tied into your sanitary system. And that we did look at trying to get done as much as we could with the current amount, which is also $35,000. And this was kind of put together by Kurt shortly before he left. But what we discovered when we sat down with one of the local consultants, we've got enough money in there for about 25% per year. In discussing this with Mike, we talked about really trying to make a run to do the whole system. And we would like to move forward with your blessing, I guess, to turn this into a 4-year contract moving forward, so we could do the entire system and really just be done with it. You know, a lot of this stemmed from a couple of years ago when we had some storm events and we had just drastic increases at the water coming in down at the wastewater treatment plant for to go through the system there. And we really didn't have any type of explanation. Now, we've had some similar rain events, and we haven't had necessarily the large increases down at the wastewater treatment plant coming in for treatment. So we'd really just like to have the opportunity to go through the entire system and see if there's any abnormalities that we can find, and just try to make sure we identify them and take care of them.
Is that sort of in lieu of buying that pump again or leasing that big pump? And I think that's a really good idea to get an understanding of the system and what's going on.
I'll get that, Scott. Yeah, we probably will lease the pump until we can get through the 4 years,
Okay.
so that we can hopefully identify where these breaches are and hopefully repair them, so that we don't have that huge influx in the spring or during rain events. Or we just buy a pump for about $200,000.
Other commissioners, questions on this section? I'm seeing some head nods. Sounds like a good idea. I know you can't see us, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much. Eric will jump in here and do the municipal service center and finish up with the motor pool.
All right, thank you. We're in the home stretch here, so I'll keep this relatively quick. So if you're on page 244, we have the fact sheets for the service center. Same as City Hall, we do not have a on-staff custodian anymore. We use a cleaning company, and that has been giving us substantial savings, and we'd like to continue doing that. Moving on to the next page, page 245. There's the budget for the building, and there's really not a whole lot to point out here. I mean, it's a new building. There's really no new projects. You know, it's just maintenance. And all I'd like to say is after, you know, running the building for 3 years now, we seem to have a better idea of what it takes, you know, maintenance-wise, as far as, you know, when we first walked in, you know, we weren't quite sure, you know, how much money we're going to spend in filters, how much we're going to spend in life and safety gas sensors in the garage and things like that. So after 3 years, we got a pretty good handle on it, and it has gone up just slightly, but I feel confident that I think that's where it's going to stay for quite some time. Any questions on the service center? Okay, moving on to motor pool. This page 247, this is where the question was asked about the mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
So we did add a mechanic last year. We budgeted for it due to we had some labor issues we were working through, and then also the COVID issue. We didn't get around to, we weren't able to interview for that position till later on, and then when COVID got really bad, we kind of held off on hiring any new positions. With that said, though, we did still do work for the township, so we've signed agreements with Chocolate Township and Marquette Township. We've been doing work for them on their fire trucks and ambulances. They've been very pleased with our work. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the revenue's been on that, but they've had vehicles in here. I'd say, you know, at least every other week we've done something for them. So it has definitely generated revenue. So we did put for the mechanic in again this year. I'm hoping maybe, depending on budget situation, we'll be able to add that position here in September. We do have a candidate in mind, and I'd hate to lose them, so that'll be up to Mike to move forward with that. And just for knowledge sakes, the county has approached us about doing some of their vehicles as well, Marquette County, and we really can't take it on until we get that guy. So I think as soon as we get the guy, we can even expand our services even further.
I think Mike's hearing the memo loud and clear, Eric.
I've heard it before.
He's gonna shoot me now. The rest of it's the fact sheets on the equipment that we use, the work that we do. Going on to the next page, our maintenance. You know, our big line items are 740 and 775. You can see, you know, we're 775. We're $500,000. We've been that way now for a couple of years. We're basically flat there again this year. A lot of that is not just things that break, but it's also projects that we work on. So if you move on to page 249 at the bottom, you can see some of the things we want to do this year under that 775 line item. You know, we do things like dump box repairs and refurbishment of trucks, and what it does is it really helps us extend the life of the vehicles that we have. So instead of spending $40,000, you know, on a dump truck box, we can go in and refurb it for $10,000 and keep it good for another 15 years. So there's just a list of some of the projects that we have going on there. You know, trailer repairs, underbody, cutting edges, that's something we do every year. And then there is one typo under the refurbished unit. It says 745. It really should be 710, which is a plow. So we're going to refurbish a plow this year. Moving down really to probably one of the larger expenditures is going to be the capital outlay. This is all CIP. And unfortunately, with the way things have been the previous years, we've been kicking the can down the road on some of the larger purchases like loaders and a plow truck. I know we have purchased some, but you know, we haven't kept up with really the demand or what the fleet is and the life of the vehicle. So this year we were able to get the 2 front end loaders and a plow truck on. So our equipment's up to about $1.1 million this year. That includes some light duty vehicles as well, which includes police. You know, the nice thing about catching up with these larger vehicles is that we do have fire trucks coming up in a few years, and you know, that's going to be probably an $800,000 hit per truck, and we need 2 of them. So I think if we can, you know, keep forward and be aggressive in keeping the rest of the fleet healthy, it'll be easier to address those fire trucks in the future. Are there any questions on motor pool?
Commissioner Bonzel?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just curious, as you noted, you know, we are spending quite a bit of money on new vehicles, and I was just curious how many of these vehicles are replacing old, outdated vehicles that are currently in the fleet, and how many, if any, are actually adding to the size of the motor vehicle fleet?
So nothing's going to add to the fleet. We might, I take that back. There might be one light duty vehicle because of a need in maintenance area, but otherwise, you know, when we put in for a loader, we get rid of a loader. So we'll be getting rid of 2 of our older loaders that are, you know, they got quite a few hours on them, and to the point that we have to sink an exceptional amount of money in them to, you know, keep them running, you know, to the level that we expect. So now's the time to kind of unload them and move on. And the same with the plow truck. You know, we'll be able to unload an older plow truck and you know, strengthen the fleet in that regard. So we're not expanding it. We're just more of a replacement. And then we'll take the money generated from that, and that'll offset the cost a little bit. You know, we don't get a ton of money for used equipment because the stuff is pretty old, but there will be a slight offset in the cost.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that.
Other commissioners? I don't think we have any more questions.
Well, good. Looks like we beat 7 o'clock, so no electric shocks.
We were scared, Gary. We were really scared.
I do appreciate all the presenters. I think we did this one in record time, so I do appreciate everybody being concise and to the point. That concludes our presentation for tonight. We'll take it up again Monday night at 5:15 with what I refer to as Friends of the City, and those would be the DDA, the library, the Brownfield, and LDFA kind of components. So thank you, and I'm done.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, staff that presented tonight. Informative as always. We are now moving on to public comment. Do we have anyone on the line for public comment here?
Only staff members.
All right, public comment is now closed. Commissioners, I think we had ample time to discuss this evening, but if you've got a burning question, now is the time. Or comment? Seeing none, okay. Commission comment, we have none. Comments from the city manager, do you have any this evening, Mike? Okay, we are adjourned at 6:58 PM.
Another record.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Just so you know, they ask for those front end loaders every year, okay?